Studies Section 4, Institutions of Foreign Policy Administration in Nigeria. Introduction. In this study session, we will examine the roles of various institutions involved in the making and implementation of foreign policy in Nigeria. Learning outcomes. When you have studied this study session, you should be able to 1. Analyze the roles of institutions involved in making and implementing foreign policy in Nigeria. Nigeria's foreign policy administration actors. There are different institutions of foreign policy making in Nigeria. These are the Presidency, Ministry of External Affairs, the Legislature, the Nigerian Institute of International Affairs (NIIA), and others. In reality, however, the tendency has always been for leaders to personalize foreign policy decision-making. This is not to suggest that political leaders are always independent and have a free hand in policy making, but that the final decision is always their prerogative, and such decisions may or may not be based on available facts depending on the issue at stake. The administrative base for the making of Nigeria's foreign policy in 1960 was very small and ill-equipped. Desk officers depended on newspaper clippings, and each covered one or two continents. There were hardly any policy position papers. Discussions and decisions assumed the feature of ad hoc reactions to events after telephone conversations and hasty meetings. Because of this deficiency, the British Governor-General and his Chief Secretary became very influential in the administration of the Nigerian Foreign Office at independence. The Presidency. The former executive authority granted in the exclusive legislative list includes the conduct of foreign affairs, defense, negotiation of treaties, foreign trade and investment, etc. There is the Cabinet Office, which is directly under the Presidency, and it is coordinated by the Secretary to the Federal Government. Within the Cabinet Office are duplicate departments, with each responsible for liaising between the Presidency and a particular ministry. There is a Department of Foreign Affairs in the Cabinet Office. It liaises with the Ministry of External Affairs (MEA) and briefs the President regularly on happenings in the ministry. The President also has extra bureaucratic advisors and special assistants who advise him regularly on foreign affairs matters. Sometimes decisions bordering on Nigeria's foreign policy are made without the involvement of the MEA. A good instance was in 1983 when the MEA denied knowledge of the Presidency decision to expel all illegal aliens just within a fortnight to the execution of the decision. When Nigeria was invited to the Summit of Islamic Nations in Rabat, Morocco, following the 1969 bombing of Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem, General Gowon, the then head of state, tactically sent a delegation to the meeting, but later wrote to the effect that the delegation was not on official capacity, obviously to avoid any diplomatic rift with Christian countries, especially at the time of civil war. Ministry of External Affairs (MEA). The making and management of Nigeria's external relations is an executive activity, just like in any other country. It was assigned the broad responsibility for the conduct of government business relating to foreign and Commonwealth affairs. In plain terms, the MEA is the principal organ for the formulation and implementation of foreign policy in Nigeria. In his work, Olusola Ojo described the Nigerian Foreign Service, symbolized by the MEA, as the brains of foreign policy, where the impressions from the outside world are gathered and evaluated, and where the impulses emanate, which the diplomatic representatives transform into actual foreign policy. The minister, usually a political appointee of the president, heads the ministry. He is expected to give the ministry the necessary political direction. At times, ministers of state are appointed to assist the minister in the discharge of his duties. He is also a political appointee appointed at the discretion of the president. The professional head of the ministry used to be the permanent secretary, later called Director General. He was assisted by a deputy permanent secretary. However, the position of the permanent secretary was once scrapped under the Babangida regime. The administrative head was then the Director General, who could either be a political appointee or a career officer. The rest of the ministry is split into 6 functional departments, 4 regional departments, and 6 special units. Ambassadors and other representatives of the country abroad are part of the MEA. It is the minister who recommends to the president who should represent the country and where, although this may not always be the case, as the president has the prerogative at any time to appoint the nation's principal representatives. Politicization of recruitment, appointment in the foreign service, and controversy over jurisdiction are problems encountered by the ministry too. For instance, jurisdictional disputes often occur between the MEA and the Ministry of Information over which of the two is responsible for the country's external publicity. This imbroglio has not augured well for the nation's external image because it sometimes resulted in lack of adequately coordinated external publicity. In the area of external economic relations, 3 other key ministries have been allocated different aspects of it. Although the MEA has an economic division, it has no primary responsibility for the country's external economic relations. This responsibility belongs to the Ministries of Finance, Trade and National Planning. Officials of the Ministry of Trade are always attached to selected Nigerian embassies as commercial attaches to provide economic intelligence information to the government, promote business contacts, and attract foreign investment to Nigeria. These attaches do not hold their loyalty to the MEA and are always not very serious officers who can participate in public policy making at the high level. Part B of Post 566, Study Section 4. The Ministry of Finance is essentially responsible for external borrowing, relations with the IFIs, and external financial aid and other aspects of international monetary relations. A new ministry tagged Ministry for Integration in Africa was created in 1999 by the Obasanjo administration to handle such functions as relations with ECOWAS, ECA, etc. Since 1984 also, the Ministry of Petroleum Resources has been responsible for relations with OPEC. Legislature. In Nigeria's past 2 civilian regimes since independence, one was a parliamentary system while the other was a presidential system. The parliament did not play a major role in foreign policy making. Besides, the committee was not supported by adequate research staff and it met infrequently. In the area of ambassadorial appointment, although the Senate was empowered under the 1979 Constitution to give its advice and consent to nominees for ambassadorial positions, it never for once refused to confirm presidential nominees throughout the Second Republic. Such matters were mostly passed on the basis of political affiliation. Nigerian Institute of International Affairs, NIIA. The NIIA was established in 1961. It was originally an independent, non-official, non-political, and non-profit making organization. In August 1971, it was taken over by the federal government and it is believed that it has retained its character as an independent body even though its Director General is always an appointee of the government. Its main objectives are 1. To encourage and facilitate the understanding of international affairs and of the circumstances, conditions, and attitudes of foreign countries and their people. 2. To provide and maintain means of information upon international questions and promote the study and investigation of international questions by means of conferences, lectures, and discussions, and by the preparation and publication of books, records, and reports, etc. It serves a major think tank of foreign policy for the country. It provides advice to the government on foreign relations, although its impact in actually influencing foreign policy depends on the relationship that exists at any particular time between it and the MEA and the presidency. Some of Nigeria's foreign ministers, like Bolaji Akeyemi and Agboola Gambari, headed the institute before becoming external affairs ministers. Other academic institutes where useful debate on foreign policy is usually carried out are the Nigerian Institute for Policy and Strategic Studies (NIPSS) and the Nigerian Institute for Social and Economic Research (NISA), multinational corporations (MNCs). MNCs are believed to be actors in the decision-making process of a dependent peripheral country like Nigeria. Multinational corporations, because of their stronghold on the Nigerian economy as well as international institutions like the World Bank and the IMF, have had and continue to have considerably influence in the formulation and character of Nigerian foreign policy. Multinational companies that have had great influence on Nigeria's domestic and, in effect, external relations include Shell Petroleum, especially because of its enormous involvement and partnership with the Nigerian government in the oil sector. Other external forces that do mount enormous pressures on Nigeria's foreign policy making process include key international financial institutions like the IMF, the World Bank, and dub of creditors like the Paris and the London clubs of creditors. Informal sector. It is not uncommon in Nigeria to have press comments and public debate on foreign policy issues in the media and among the foreign policy elite in the universities, labor unions, NGOs, religious organizations like Christian Association of Nigeria (CAN) and the Supreme Council for Islamic Affairs (SCIA), and political parties. Others are the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria (MAN), the Nigerian Labour Congress (NLC), etc. Topical issues that have generated heated debate in the Nigerian public included the Anglo-Nigerian Defense Pact in the 1960s, Nigeria's relations with the IMF, OIC, Organization of Islamic Conference, the Bakassi Peninsula, ECOMOG, etc. Public debate was not strong enough to dissuade Nigerians from embarking on the Structural Adjustment Programs (SAPs) and joining the OIC under the Babangida regime against continued pressure from the Council of Islamic Affairs. Although influenced by a number of international and domestic factors, his perception of these factors and his personal preferences are the most crucial at the end of the day. The making and termination of the Anglo-Nigerian Defense Pact in the early 60s was a decision taken by the Prime Minister in conformity with his political values and style. Because of military command structure, decision-making under military regimes in Nigeria has been more personalized. Although the Gowon regime relied more on bureaucrats, the Mohammed Obasanjo regime cared less about such protocol. For instance, the decision to recognize the MPLA in Angola was brought before the Supreme Military Council (SMC), the highest decision-making organ in the military regime. Only when Mohammed has made up his mind to recognize the MPLA. Decision-making during the Obasanjo military government was always the prerogative of an inner core of about 5 which used to meet almost every other day, and more often in emergencies, to take decisions on behalf of the SMC Council. Apart from Obasanjo, others in this committee of 5 were Obasanjo's deputy, Shehu Yaradua, the Chief of Army Staff, T.Y. Danjuma, the Inspector General of Police, M.D. Yusuf, and the Commander of the Armored Corps, Ibrahim Babangida. This committee would cope whoever it deemed relevant depending on the issues at stake. The decision to nationalize the asset of British Petroleum in 1979 by the Obasanjo government was the handiwork of some members of this committee without question by the Council SMC. Study Section Summary. In this study session, the various institutions responsible for the making of Nigeria's foreign policy were examined. The making and management of Nigeria's external relations is an executive activity just like in any other country. The Ministry of External Affairs (MEA) is primarily responsible for the management of Nigeria's foreign policy. The ministry works in conjunction with the presidency in the formulation and execution of Nigeria's foreign policy. In reality, however, The tendency has always been for leaders to personalize foreign policy decision-making. Other actors that contribute to foreign policy are the legislature, the Nigerian Institute for International Affairs, MNCs, and other groups from the informal sector. This is the end of study section 4. Thanks for listening.